Welcome, my friends, back to the fog, a realm of twisted evil, death, and fear. A world where a mad god mocks the boundaries of life and death, where savage killers and monsters hunt for fearful and desperate survivors. And in this world of monsters, it pays to be a fighter, even if you can't win, because a fighter never gives up and endures the worst hardships, though it means they'll often be left very vulnerable. Among the survivors in the fog, there are few who compare to the fighting spirit of David King. David King was born to an affluent family. His mother and father were both very wealthy, but David's father was a bit abusive. Well, rather very abusive to his wife and son, pushing him to pursue greatness in everything he did, which he gladly did. He excelled in athletics and academics, and his future was more than a little promising, provided he wasn't so aggressive. Perhaps it was due to his father's brutal nature, but David became very competitive and very aggressive. He picked fights often, which made him somewhat abrasive, though he did never lack for friends. You see, David had many friends, in both school and in his later career in rugby. You see, it was his family who encouraged him to pursue rugby, and he took to it well. He was a promising player who had a bright future ahead of him, but he ended up blowing his chances at a career when he attacked the referee during a match, banning him from the league for good. But no big deal. David took this better than was expected. Since he was always sponsored by his family, he could still afford to live as he saw fit. Going out to clubs, he became a regular underground fighting champion. He frequented bars and became a bouncer at a few clubs. And when it came to fighting, David was in a league of his own. He was a monster in the ring and fought like a demon. A lot of this stemmed from the fact that when he fought, he saw his abusive father in every opponent he fought, and felt like he was taking out his rage against his old man for his abusive behavior. But things changed one night. While eating dinner with his family, his father flew into a rage and started beating his mother. Outraged, David rushed to his mother's defense and beat his father to the ground, which led him being cut off from the family fortune for good. It was only then that David realized the truth. With him no longer connected to his father's wealth, he realized that being rich doesn't mean you're rich. Yes, I know that's a paradoxical statement, and it can only be understood by the realization from those who are wealthy but realize that they are not well off. You see, the friends he thought he had faded fast. Without his family's money, he was not welcomed in by the people he thought liked him. Even his own ex-girlfriend claimed she would never want to see him again, something about him being a shithead, go figure. Only one of his old friends would be willing to take him in, a fellow named Donnie, who had been his friend since before he knew that King was wealthy. Donnie allowed King to stay in his home until he figured his life out, but frankly, King didn't know how to start. After finally confronting his father the way he had, his spark was gone. He no longer had the edge he used to in fighting. He didn't have the same rage against his father anymore, and without that rage, he wasn't the fighter he used to be. He lost a vicious fight against a new contender in the underground fighting circuit named the Ghetto Masher, and with that loss, King realized he needed to find a new line of work. He got a job as a bartender at the pub, where he began earning an honest wage, and was doing a pretty good job overall. But for Donnie, things were getting difficult. You see, Donnie was a hopeless gambler, and had spent the last of his money betting on King to beat Ghetto Masher. With King having lost, Donnie was in serious debt. One night at the bar, the mob came to collect. Dragging Donnie into the basement of the pub, Ghetto Masher began to beat Donnie senseless at the behest of the mob boss named Uncle Brass. King couldn't watch this. He couldn't let the only friend who'd stood by him, who was willing to bet on him, even now, be hurt for him. He rushed in and became the monster he was known for, beating Ghetto Masher so hard he knocked his eye out. The brawl was only stopped when Uncle Brass stepped in and offered David King a deal. Work for me as a debt collector, and I'll forgive your friend's debt. King agreed to the proposal and helped Donnie out of the pub. After all, it pays to bet on the king. But when David stopped showing up and seemed to have disappeared, no one was all that surprised. Many thought that he just ended up in a fight he couldn't win, or maybe the mob boss Uncle Brass actually did a double cross on him. Maybe he pissed off the wrong person. No one knew the truth, and maybe it was better that way. Ladies and gentlemen, it is at this point in the video that we must deviate from the normal production and presentation of the story, as we have a problem. You see, all of the lore I've told you for now comes from the original lore written and the first tome given to David King. But there's another tome that was released far more recently, and it actually is rather shocking. I do not consider this tome a continuation of the lore, but rather a deviation from it. Because if you hold it up in comparison to the first tome about David King, they hardly seem like the same person. His life as a mob debt collector is not mentioned. Donnie is not mentioned. His fighting career is barely referenced. It's as if someone stepped in to rewrite his lore entirely, and you'll see why when you hear about it. You see, in this tome, it's revealed that David King met a boy named Tristan, who he became friends with during his younger years thanks to music camp. Tristan and he grew very close to the point of a homosexual relationship. It was all in secret, of course, as King's family was disapproving of their son engaging in a homosexual relation. But Tristan wanted it bad and began pushing King to deny his parents and stay true to him so they could start a family one day. David wanted to, but couldn't bring himself to do it. Tristan didn't take this well, and during David's birthday the year before his disappearance, Tristan shows up and gives a mocking toast at David's birthday party at the pub. After that, for the rest of that year, David falls into a bitter depression where all he does is drink himself into a stupor. His only friend, a psychoanalyzing fellow named Rick, who listens to him and tries to help him come to terms with how he really feels. From there, David picks fights with old fans, gets beaten up in an alley, and finally, after some heavy coaxing, begins telling Rick the entire story about him and Tristan. Rick encourages David to be true to who he is and pursue Tristan. It's revealed that Tristan is moving to New York for a piano gig, and he's bringing along his new boyfriend. David rushes to the airport to catch him and barely reaches him in time, but unable to say the words he wants to, he merely states, quote, "No more bullshit," before Tristan is forced to board the plane to New York. The following night, while walking a lonely street and lamenting his lost love, he turns around to see Tristan standing there, smiling at him. Rushing to embrace his lover, the image suddenly fades to reveal fog. And this reveals how David King was claimed by the entity. Now, riddle me this, my dear viewer. Do you buy that second tome I just described to you for 1 minute as actual lore the writers made from the beginning, or something they threw together as a sappy soap opera drama for diversity and inclusiveness? I'm by no means against David being gay, because that's not the issue here. The issue is that this half-baked story doesn't fit at all with what we were originally given. The first tome, which tells about his resentment of his father, the loss of his friends, the connection with Donnie, and him reclaiming his fighting spirit by saving a friend, that falls very much in line with the basic lore we were given, and it's an interesting discovery of what happens to a rich kid who's lost everything and realizes the friends he thought he had only liked him for his money. It also explores the idea of taking out your anger against people because of abuse. There are lessons there about abusive parenthoods, lessons about who you can trust in terms of friends, what it takes to be a friend, what money really means. There's a lot going there. This new tome, though, feels hastily slapped on. A sappy and forced homosexual romance story to try and be inclusive. And what makes it worse is if they really wanted the homosexual angle, they could have very easily revealed that David and Donnie became involved with each other. You can keep the homosexual angle and still made the two stories work somewhat. But instead of doing that, they made new characters, new conflicts, and essentially ruined what respect David King's story had. And to anyone who wants to argue that the two tomes do fit well somehow, let's propose a few questions. Question 1. According to the second tome, King was asked a year before his disappearance to start a family with Tristan. He broke up with him shortly after that, so we can assume he declined sometime shortly after the initial question. That provides us with 1 year of time at most in between. Now, in this time, if keeping in continuity with the first tome, at some point, he no longer is bound to his family, because remember, he attacked his father during dinner one night and left him bloody on the ground and was cut off from the family, right? So, during that time when he had nowhere to stay and was asking his friends for help, why does he not reach out to Tristan in his time of need? Would that not have been the perfect time to rekindle the old relationship? I mean, he's no longer with his unaccepting family. He's no longer tied to his rich douchebag family. Why not move in with Tristan, start the life you wanted? The only reason he didn't take the life with Tristan was because of his family, right? Why not do it now? Which leads to question number 2. Building off the first question, why did he room with Donnie during this difficult time and not Tristan? I suppose you could argue that Tristan had a boyfriend now and he didn't want things to be awkward, but that didn't stop him from reaching out to his ex-girlfriend, so that seems to be a weak excuse. Not only that, but we learned that this new boyfriend of Tristan's has only known him for a month, as per King's own explanation, so they haven't been together very long. And thirdly, who the hell is Rick? Rick is this character who just kind of shows up to help David realize he needs to be honest with himself and what he feels about himself, and that he needs to accept his love for Tristan. Okay, Rick seems like a really upstanding, friendly guy, so why didn't Rick offer him help when he was outed by his family? Where was Rick during that period? As you can probably tell, this second tome was hastily glued to the lore so that David could be gay and they could add a gay character to the cast. But it's so poorly written and so obviously scotch-taped to the product that anyone with half a brain cell can see it as the lazy and half-assed inclusion initiative that it is. There was a natural solution to all this. If you really wanted to have David be a homosexual character, I don't think you needed to. I think he was fine as he was. I think the story of friendship with Donnie and King was fine, but let's say you just had to add it. Okay, simply have Donnie and David become a couple in your second tome and show how it fell apart or something. It was a natural and easy thing to do, and they didn't do it, meaning the writer of this tome was either unfamiliar with the first tome or didn't care. This lore is pathetic, which is sad because how it started promised to be far greater than this. But I suppose that makes sense, because in terms of playability, David is one of the survivors whose perks I just can't stand. David's playstyle allows him to play far more aggressively, but at the risk of exposing himself. His perks are, we're gonna live forever, dead hard, and no mither. We're Gonna Live Forever is a commonly used perk by survivors, aiming to irritate the killer while also healing others. The perk grants 100% healing speed while healing someone in the dying state. However, when you perform a safe hook rescue, take a protection hit, stun the killer to rescue a survivor, this perk gains 1 token. You can then spend 1 token to grant the endurance status effect for up to 10 seconds to any survivor you heal from the dying state. This is a decent perk to support your team at the cost of your own safety, as you must put yourself at risk to take advantage of the token system. Next is the famous, or infamous, depending on your perspective, Dead Hard. It's perhaps one of the most known and controversial perks in the game. At one point, it was incredibly powerful. Killers detested it and survivors loved it. But it recently went through a rework, a bit of a nerf, so now people aren't happy with it. So what I'm going to share here is the modern rework, okay? After you escape a hook by any means, you can press the active ability button while injured to gain the endurance status effect for 0.5 seconds, allowing you to escape danger. You then suffer from the exhausted status effect for as little as 40 seconds. If you want to debate about whether this change is good or bad, you're free to it. As far as I'm concerned, Dead Hard was already a pretty strong perk to begin with, and I think it will likely remain that way. Then there's No Mither. No Mither, by contrast, may be the most useless perk in the game as far as I'm concerned. I would rather run entirely perkless than equip this perk. You go through the whole trial in the broken state. You cannot be healed out of it. Yes, that means that you are permanently injured throughout the trial. The benefits you gain, though, are as follows. 1, you do not leave pools of blood. 2, your injured grunts and noises are reduced by up to 75%. 3, your recovery speed is increased by up to 25%. And 4, you can recover fully from the dying state. Now, to equip this perk, you need to ask yourself, is the risk worth the reward? Now, I say no. Being able to recover out of the dying state and recover faster only matters if the killer downs you without hooking you right away. In other words, they slug you. And seeing as most killers will just hook you right away anyway, it's hardly meaningful. True, you don't leave pools of blood and you're a little quieter, but you still leave red marks, which is what most killers use to hunt you anyway. No Mither's benefits, as far as I can tell, do not make the broken effect worth it. More often than not, this perk is only used by players who want to flex, to show off how good they are as survivors with a huge handicap. David King is the perfect example of a promising idea that failed part of the way. As a character, he's the gruff, sturdy fighter who can't actually fight back against the killer. His lore told the story of a rich kid with parent issues who fell on difficult times due to his own aggression, but then found a true friend who stood by his side and who rekindled his fighting spirit. Only for them to rewrite this into a new homosexual relationship soap opera story for him at last minute, that barely even connects to his original lore. He's got perks that embody a bold playstyle that promises high risk and reward decision making, only for him to carry one of the most critically underwhelming perks ever. The problem is, I should love David King, but I can only shake my head in annoyance. The king has fallen. Now, I know a lot of people out there like David King and they like his perks, and some of them are even fans of his second tome that I'm not a big fan of. And if you like all those things, you're free to. Keep in mind that when I make these videos, I'm only giving you my perspective and the way I look at the killer or survivor's lore about how good they are or how bad they are. As far as I can tell, David King's original lore was top-notch, and the first tome really emphasized a lot of stuff that I liked about his story. The second tome, I think, could have been okay if the first tome never existed. But because it does, it feels like it was scotch taped to the original, and it just doesn't fit. It really doesn't work. David doesn't strike me as the kind of character that would fit this story. So that's why I take issue with it. And as for his perks, if you like Dead Hard or hate Dead Hard, I can understand either position. I can understand why some people aren't happy with the nerf to it, and I can also understand why some people love it so much. And as for No Mither, I'm sure I'm going to get some people in the comment section letting me know how awesome of a perk it is and how I just don't respect it. Well, I'm glad you like it. I'm not a big fan of it. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and tune in next time when we return to the fog to talk about a mask-wearing demoness. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you in my next one. Take care.